Welcome to the New York Outlook for Thursday, the 22nd of February 2024. Starting off with the economic calendar, we had some GBP news which was negative for the GBP, and that essentially helped with my trading idea, although not triggered, but we'll go into that shortly. And then from a USD perspective, we have a number of news events. The first coming out 30 minutes into the start of the session, and then the next bit of PMI news coming out subsequently. In terms of where we are after the London session, my bias is purely to short, and for that to happen I need USD news to be conclusively short, or at least mixed after a New York validation of the London high of the day. Um, Having said all of that, let's move on to the chart, starting off with the 4-hour. So what we can see right here is that from Frankfurt Open we essentially moved all the way up and achieved the unconfirmed lower high target. So just for context, if you recall, we were in a bearish market structure. At the time, this was the likely unconfirmed lower high, swing lower high, that is. I'll mark it in red, and that was yet to be confirmed. However, since the interaction of this pro trend extreme OB, which I'll just put on a label right here, pro trend extreme OB, we then had the pro trend primary leg validated. However, subsequent to that, we had an order flow shift where demand to control, you can see right here. I'll just mark it out. Supply failed over here, then demand held right here, broke structure, and then we can validate that demand is likely in control, either to build liquidity or potentially to change the market structure. However, what the demand control actually meant in the context of the lower high being created, failing to take out the lower low right here, and then a demand control shift told us that this swing lower high that was unconfirmed is likely weak and to be targeted as liquidity. For that reason, we were in an unconfirmed scenario from essentially yesterday being Wednesday, and that essentially means that because we were in an unconfirmed scenario, there was reasons to trade both longs and shorts. From a shorting perspective, because of the pro trend move with the objective of targeting this substructure, and then from a long perspective, because of validating the 4H demand control, we were targeting this, and we had this window of imbalance right here, which I highlighted in the London Outlook, with the objective of targeting that substructure. However, this morning what we did is achieve this unconfirmed lower high substructure, which essentially means that from this point, well, from the New York session onwards, or from this point onwards, there's only reason to short, because once again we're in the pro trend primary extreme, and since we haven't body broken this level, there's no reason to believe that the pullback phase, which was this phase right here, is back in action, in the sense that the pullback phase last point of supply can be identified, which would be right around here. And since we haven't validated that the pullback phase leg is extended, instead we just wick this level, likely confirming that it's probably liquidity. That essentially means that once again there's only reasons to short. We are out of the unconfirmed scenario, and it's from a 5 and 15 minute perspective, we will begin developing that that pro trend primary leg like we did right here, and from a 4H perspective that will be validated when we body break this level, actually when we wick this level, because once again we're reacting to a pro trend 4H OB, and wicks will validate new 4-hour legs, which this is likely to develop. So what does this mean for our New York trading? Essentially, for our New York trading, we purely focused on shorts. Even if we body break this level, what it would mean is that the pullback phase last point of supply would be developed, and for the purposes of understanding that, because we're reacting to the pro trend extreme, we will need the 4H pullback OB to support a counter trend trade before we can trade long. So again, for that to develop is going to take some time, and thus for the New York session we purely focus on shorting. just to go over what happened in the London session, essentially in the London session we actually took out the unconfirmed lower high target, and thus it put us in a situation of only shorting. And because we're only in a situation of shorting, we then went on to look for ways to validate that the London high of the day will hold. And our options for this was quite limited, and we had GBP news validate that the London high of the day will hold. Obviously the Frankfurt session is all the way down here, and because London put in a new high of the day, we will need New York to break the London low of the day to then support why a New York to support why the London high of the day will hold. So having said that, we had that red folder GBP news, which was negative right here. You can see services PMI was neutral, so I wasn't too concerned that it's a mixed result. It's more so a negative result, and that supports the premise that this London high of the day will hold. I then identified this range OB because there's multiple candles situated within this one large OB. So I set my entry right here. As you can see, it didn't quite reach there, although it might just take us in when we get these USD news events. So having said that, and maybe just touching on the news events, these are red folder but not so significant as interest rate, CPI or NFP, and thus I'm happy to keep this entry where it is, at least for the time being. It aligns nicely with this 38% level. Obviously once the news is released, depending on whether it's positive or negative, I will assess whether it's worth keeping the trade open. So what I mean by that, if like I said, my bias is purely to short, so I need all of these news events to be to be positive for the USD, suggesting a stronger USD and a sell-off of GU. If unemployment claims turns out to be negative, and I do get tagged into the trade, then my protocol would be to set my TP at break even plus commission so that I can get out with the break even, or I'll accept the loss because I accept the risk that I may get the daily direction wrong. Although at this point we've likely already moved majority, if not all, of the daily range, but anything can happen with red folder news events, so I accept that risk. And then if this news is negative for the USD, then again it would invalidate any shorts. And then moving on to the PMI news session. So if the PMI news is actually negative but unemployment claims is positive, then we're sitting in a mixed news situation, and I'll be able to take a new short position only if the New York session validates the London high of the day with by taking out the London session low. So perhaps it's worth marking this out. So the London session low is right here and the session high is right there. So if New York comes and weaks the London session low, and then even if unemployment claims is negative, it's negative but PMI is positive, having a net result of a session mixed news release, provided that the PMI news release is positive and New York session actually took out the Asia range low, which would then mean that the New York session validated the London high of the day, and we're not news reliant on validating this London high of the day, then we can take that short position on the premise that the latest news release is negative. So that would somewhat make sense. And then obviously the last option is that New York actually puts in a new high of the day, and for that to be valid to trade, I'd need unemployment claims to be positive to validate that the New York high of the day will hold, and I'll also need PMI to be positive as well, so that any trades taken between 330 and 445 makes sense. Obviously if the net New York session news release is mixed and we're trying to validate a New York high of the day with news, given that it's mixed news overall, it doesn't make sense to say that the New York high of the day will hold. So there's a couple of scenarios to take into account, given the news release based validation of why a high of the day should hold or not. So perhaps just to summarize, we're purely looking for shorts for the New York session. In order to trade shorts, we need New York news alignment, essentially meaning that USD news needs to be positive. And if that's the case, then we can trade a number of combination of short positions. Obviously, in addition to that, there's a number of combinations of how the New York news releases will come out and at what point they invalidated. So it may be a bit tricky to navigate, but I think the underlying bias is quite obvious. And I hope you have a good New York session, and we will chat again for the end of day review.